So, welcome back to 3rd Age Reforged and to another battle replay. And actually what was originally going to be here was another scenario sent by Eclipse 2500 of the Dark Cloud. However, unfortunately, the dreaded spectre of crashing reared its ugly head again. And yeah, it was on a big cityscape map. And honestly, it's to the point now where I think if someone sends me a battle replay on a map that's just one big city, obviously cityscapes with lots of buildings, lots of objects on them, I think I'm just going to have to turn them down, to be honest with you, because I'm so sick and tired of it. It's always the same sort of maps. Miststrand is one example, but we all know which ones they are at this point. They may be fine to play on, but for my purposes, it just doesn't function. And I really don't want to have to go through another 49,000 frame battle, only for it to crash every step of the way, and for eventually my enthusiasm just to be beaten down into a pulp, to the point where I can't carry on. So that's the situation as it is. There may be a few things I can do to try and improve stability, but to be honest with you, they would all make a relatively minor difference, I think. So I think it's just done for, to be honest with you, that replay, which is a shame because Eclipse seemed to think it was a good one. Nonetheless, we do have another replay that the player was fairly interested to give me. I think mainly though because it's quite an interesting little theme we've got going on here. This is of course a very well-known map. This is the Mountain Pass, and we have 3 teams on display today. We have the Elves over here with Deadly Boy and Manus Hudson 1. We have the Dwarves over here, played by Morris and by Gimli, son of Gloin, fittingly. And over here we have the Numenoreans, played by Bloodbath McGrath and by Rob. So, we'll go through the blue team first and foremost, playing as the Elves, so place your bets on who you believe is going to win this encounter. All of the factions on display today are good ones, I would say. There's, all of the factions that are going to be fighting off against each other are going to be of high quality, I would say. Starting off with Manus Hudson, who's playing as Lothlorien, obviously peerless when it comes to their ranged power. Woodland Protectors up close and personal with their javelins, and of course the spears. There may be a couple of units of cavalry buzzing around, which they will be useful for, but primarily the javelins, of course, to try and deal with the heavy armour of both the Dwarves and the Numenoreans. Blades of the Wood, pretty much the stark opposite to that. They don't really have much armour at all, but they do have some good skill. This is one of those situations, however, where there's a lot of quality on display for the other factions as well, so they might not be able to be as efficient as they would otherwise be, but they should still do decently enough as long as they're backed up properly. A unit that will be very useful for Lothlorien, however, that other Elven factions don't really have access to, are the Lorenan Warriors. Obviously, that AP on those two-handed axes, very, very useful against all the heavily armoured troops they're going to be facing. Lorenan's spears as well should be good for holding the line. They won't be as good for dealing damage, of course, against the heavily armoured troops they're going to be facing off against. However, they will be able to take a good beating, they will be able to hold the line, and that will be important on this battle because it may very well come down to who can outlast the others more so than who can overpower, because of course everyone has got a good amount of strength today with all the factions on display. Lorenan Mounted Company, so Lorien have invested a little bit into some fast-moving lancers. Be interesting to see if they can use them effectively in the, on occasion, tight confines of the Mountain Pass. I highly doubt that we're going to be seeing more of the more open sections of the map being used today, but we'll see. I mean, a unit of cavalry like this in the late game can be unstoppable when everyone has been worn down, so just depends on whether Manus Hudson can keep his patience. The Lorenan Axemen, the upper end line infantry that Lorien can bring. And they should be pretty decent. I mean, again, you could argue that higher defense might be more useful against some of the higher quality units, but the bite of those axes could still land some decent blows, especially against some of the more basic units from a faction like Erebor, for example, or of course Umbar. So they should still find some good use, and obviously backed up by Imladris, defense is never really going to be a problem. Woodland Protectors. We also have the heavy Lorenan Archers here, so obviously, again, good in a skirmish fight, good in melee as well. I would say that the best skirmishers in this battle should probably be the Numenoreans. They probably have the best tools for being that sort of faction which digs in, takes it slow with their archers, and then uses their melee power to good effect, especially from Umbar. But the Lorenan archers can definitely contest that. It may not be an efficient fight to take, but they may not have a choice after all. Then back here we have the Kindred of Celeborn and the Watchers of the Goldenwood. This is an area, of course, that even the Numenoreans are not going to be able to really contest the Elves in. They're really high-end skirmishers. The Kindred, with their split-shot projectiles, will be useful for hitting many targets at once. And, of course, then, the Watchers of the Goldenwood with their Silverthorns, which knock troops over that are advancing towards them, or just knock them over if they're moving away as well. Makes moving away or out of the line of fire very difficult. And they're probably Lorien's most significant unit of infantry as well, just because they're really, really strong in terms of a two-handed infantry unit as well, especially without the Karascal Adhon's Guardians being present. And then, of course, we have the player who sent me the battle replay, Deadly Boy, who's going to be playing as Imladris, a real fan favourite. Upgraded Imladris Guardians, they have a real claim to being the best line infantry unit in the game for me. Again, you do pay a premium for them, especially when you upgrade their armour, but it really is worth every penny. And you can bring them in numbers as well that similar units you can't actually. Units like the Noldorin Guard, for example, from Linden are comparable, but you have less of them. And also they stand apart a little bit from Linden in the way that they are with their heavy armour, whereas most of Linden, of course, are not. So Imladris, the Imladris Guardians, they do tend to blend into Imladris' overall army a little bit better. There are some units which you could say maybe are quite comparable. The Alcarondas Legion obviously pay a little bit less for them, and you can bring them in just as great a number as the Imladris Guardians, if not more so. But on an individual quality basis, the Guardians obviously are going to be much better than them. Well, noticeably better, maybe not much better. The Imladris Sentries at the centre of the line as well. Without the Karos Galadhorn's Guardians, these are the only pikes that the elves will have brought, but they're very fine pikes to bring nonetheless. They may lack the second hit point of the Karos Galadhorn's Guardians, but in melee, because they're elves, they do tend to do obviously quite a lot of damage, which most pikes cannot do. Although on this occasion, every team is going to be able to have access to some really strong pikes in their own ways. The Imladris Sentries, however, when it comes to base damage, should be the leaders there. We also have some sort of Rivendell with the armour upgrade as well. So again, among the Imladris forces, this is a unit which isn't all that heavily armoured, to be honest with you. But, you know, the armour upgrade will help at least. And they're still going to be pretty strong in melee. But like the Blades of the Wood, maybe a little bit stronger than the Blades of the Wood in this situation just because they are a little bit more robust. But much like the Blades of the Wood, they're not going to have guaranteed efficiency, considering the factions they're going up against. Eldarenway Spearmen, again, slightly stronger than the Lorenan Spearmen they're fighting alongside, but also more expensive. So, you know, they're going to be brought in lower numbers, indeed, just the one unit, but still going to be very good in some of the narrower sections of the map for really helping hold that line. And then back here we have the Shock Infantry, we have the Broinen Riverwards, a couple of units of them, and then the slightly stronger Eldarenway Swordmasters. So a lot of heavy swordsmen there, a lot of base damage, a lot of melee defense, a lot of armour as well, which sort of sets them apart from the other elves, of course. And they have the Gwaith Ymir-Dain, which are, of course, the armour-piercing bodyguard tier shock infantry they have. Very, very deadly. We'll see how well they can be used in this fight. I mean, in theory, it's all set up for them. All of the factions they're facing off against are going to have heavily armoured units that the Ymir-Dain should be really, really good at facing. And, of course, we have the Gwaithly Rockdor as well. So Knights, much like Lorien, they have gone for a unit of fast movers. And unlike Lorien, they have access to some Lance Knights, which obviously are significantly stronger than standard Lancers. We'll see, however, if they are able to be used effectively. Now we shall move across to the stunted folk, the Dwarves, starting off with Morris. He has gone for the chariots, he's gone for the Ironfoot Wargoat chariots. Chariots, again, risk-reward. They can be really, really effective, or they can be stopped dead in their tracks without really much to show for it. And the Ironfoot Wargoat chariots are expensive. A little bit too expensive for my taste as well, especially considering among the chariots at the least, you know, they don't have as much numbers as, for example, Khans do, which gives them a real advantage in that regard. Still, the Dwarven chariots are very, very tough. Or at least tougher than most, but it doesn't really make a difference for me. Like, chariots, if they get stopped, they're going to die. So, it'll be interesting to see how they're used. Ironfoot Wargoats, they really need to keep clear of the Gwaithly Rockdor, to be honest with you, otherwise they're going to get absolutely rolled. I wouldn't fancy their chances in a straight-up melee, to be honest with you, against the Lorenan Mounted Company either, but it does give them some fast-moving options, which, to be fair, Khazad-Dum are unlikely to have brought, or at least you'd hope not in the given map. Ironfoot Warriors, the standard Ironfoot Warriors, again, solid line infantry, but no one is really going to be able to have that maximum efficiency that you might want from the infantry, considering the factions on display today. So the Warriors may not have it all their own way. They're obviously going to be beaten by the upper-end Elven line infantry units, but I think they'd probably be alright against stuff like the Blades of the Wood and even the Swords of Rivendell because of their armour, especially considering the fact that the Dwarves tend to have real strength in depth when it comes to different infantry types blended together. For example, the Ironfoot Pikes are going to be very, very useful for holding back the tide. They're obviously not as strong as something like the Imladris Sentries, but still going to be very useful for tying things together. Ironfoot Axe Throwers could be absolutely vital in this match because Ironfoot Axe, while they aren't armour piercing, they do have a lot of base damage, and against the right targets they can really give the Dwarves a really good advantage, and neither the Elves nor the Numenoreans today are going to have access to the same tool. Ironfoot Spears, again, good for holding the line, but the Spear Malice is there, of course, and they're not going to be the best infantry killers, but you know, the mass is there. The Dragon Slayers of Ered Mithrin, however, are a really strong unit. I'm glad to see he went for the armor-piercing bodyguard infantry unit for Erebor, because obviously it's going to be the most useful in this situation. Really, really powerful. Really expensive, of course, but really powerful. More spears. Crossbows are a given in this matchup, because if you can get them into a good position in the mountains, they're really difficult to dislodge because of their armor. The stopping power is obviously going to be there, and considering the higher quality nature of the armies, there's less for them to shoot at, which means there's going to be a higher portion or proportion of the enemies that they can kill per volley. And then there's the Axe Guard as well, so a bit more AP as well. So a lot of Ironfoots, quality intermingled throughout, good range support, which I agree with. We'll see if Khazad-Dum has got the infantry handled. Second Legion Axe Guard, good choice. They don't have the armor upgrade, but not really terribly necessary. They're going to be here for their damage primarily today. Khazad-Dum Reclaimers, more axe throws, of higher quality than the Ironfoots, to be fair, both at range and in melee, but obviously you pay more for them as a result. Second Legion, Orc Hunters, again, archers going to be necessary to bring them for Khazad-Dum because Erebor don't have them, and then they have themselves at the mercy of Numenorean and Elven archers, which is not where you want to be. You want to have something that can at least contest that fight, even if the dwarves are at a significant disadvantage in this particular matchup. Sons of the Fallen, Third Legion Infantry as well, Warriors of Khazad-Dum, the mighty Iron Watch, which in a setting like this could be something which is a bit of a match winner, to be fair. We'll see. Sentries of Khazad-Dum, so he's gone for some standard Khazad-Dum units of the Warriors, the Sentries. He's gone for some Miners as well, so he's gone for some numbers actually, which is interesting. Normally Khazad-Dum in this environment would be very, very tempted, I think, to go full quality. But he's gone for a few more numbers, as have Erebor, interestingly enough, so they definitely kind of have to rely, I think, on their ranged tools on this occasion, I think, to get the best out of their forces. 4th Legion are here also. That was just a bush. There's some Warriors and some more 4th Legion as well, going to hold the front line. And they are nearest to the Numenoreans, which obviously in a free-for-all like this, if you can avoid fighting for a longer period of time like the Elves could, that could be a good thing for them. Actually, just before we get into the Numenoreans, I failed to notice there's actually a unit up here. Is it Rangers, perchance? Galatharan Blade Masters and Keren Amroth Rangers. It's obviously very useful for Lothlorien if they can get them into position. However, we have Umbar, played by Bloodbath McGrath, so he's got some Corsair Blackguards, really strong javelins actually, but not a lot of ammo, and then they're a makeshift line infantry unit. Balagai Pikemen, so some basic pikes to fight on the front line, going toe-to-toe with the Ironfoots. Of course they would lose, but they're here really as a supporting measure only. Naruna Aru Royal Guard, Naruna Aru Sentinels on the other hand are a really strong pike unit. Surprised not to see the 1st Legion, because it does put the Khazad-Dum army at the mercy of some of these higher end pikemen from the Numenoreans and from the Elves, of course, when they become more of a factor. Corsair Blackguards are here also. We have the Alcarondas Legion in here with the Balakith Shield Bearers, so a combination of sword line infantry and mace line infantry. Always been a little bit underwhelmed from the Balakith Shield Bearers, to be honest with you, especially without the armor upgrade. The Balakith unit's armor without the upgrade is actually fairly mediocre. But it does offer them AP, which, to be fair, in this matchup, you do kind of want, considering you're going to be facing off against the Dwarves and Imladris, and armor piercing is more useful against them than any other Elven faction. A Dunaim Shield Guard for holding line. Everyone's gone for a healthy amount of spears, heavier spears as well, which will be useful for holding lines in these narrow chokes. These Balakith Shield Bearers do have the armor upgrade, so that will help them a little bit. Belagaya Footmen just to pad things out. More Alcarondas Legion, and the Harbingers, obviously heavy swordsmen. The first of its kind we've seen in this battle so far. Obviously the the Watchers of the Golden Wood do kind of count to that as well, but they're archers first and foremost. Harbingers, of course, a dedicated unit. And finally we have Numenor, commanded by Rob. He's also gone for some Balagai pikemen with the armour upgrade though, so stray arrows are a little bit less likely to kill them off. Seafarers of Nindamos, very similar actually to the Corsair Blackguards they're going to be fighting alongside, albeit I think they have a little bit more ammo. Or actually no, I think they have rather the same ammo, don't they? But yeah, Seafarers obviously a very important part to Numenor's ranged power. Numenor, generally speaking, have got less ammunition to play with, so Umbar might have to be sort of the initial long play, and then later on you bring in Numenor for the power. There's a Trebuchet here, which on a map like this could be really, really useful, especially considering the Iron Watcher there. This could get pretty grisly for both these factions pretty fast, actually, which would benefit the Elves ultimately. Pharazim Swordmasters, probably the single strongest infantry unit in the game at the moment. And they are definitely stronger than anything. Well, I say definitely. I mean, those Dragon Slayers are an interesting thing because of their AP, but we'll see. More Naruna Aru Sentinels. He's gone for the Royal Legion of Armenelos as well, so definitely a quality focus here from Numenor. Shield Guard, Cohort, and there's some more Belagaia back here as well, and some Belagaia footmen just to guard the rear. Shield Guard, so armor-piercing spears, good line infantry. I agree with that composition from Numenor, definitely to complement Umbar as well. Umbar going for pretty quality in general, I think, is definitely the way to go here. But without further ado, let's begin. So, it'll be quite interesting to see. I'm not going to make a cut here because we will be able to sort of read a lot into how this battle will probably go fairly early. And if, of course, Umbar decide to continue to go up here, there's obviously the Corsair crossbows as well, which have just popped into view, which will be very useful in this battle as well, but I think they'll be more useful actually if they bide their time. Khazad-Dum are moving forward, so I mean, to be fair, one thing that the Numenorians have been able to do immediately here, we've seen on this map before this choke point turn into a bit of a killing field, but Numenor, well, the Numenoreans I should say, have been able to get through this gap quickly because the dwarves didn't deploy right on the line. The dwarves of Khazad-Dum are moving forward now. I'm not sure, to be honest with you. I mean, Erebor, they are heading up here now. I mean, if I were Khazad-Dum and Erebor, I'd be very tempted to actually retreat up here onto this ledge over here. I think that would mean that then the Numenorians and the elves would be a little bit less likely to want to take that fight because they'd have to march through your crossbows, axe throwers, and any other nasties that you want to inflict on them. Corsair fencers, however, the javelin volley came in first and foremost, and the 4th Legion Shield Guard are getting absolutely dumpstered here. This is the problem. Like, Khazad-Dum have only sent forward a individual line of 4th Legion Shield Guard, and Bloodbath McGrath, being, I think, probably the most veteran player in the lobby, knows exactly what to do. He's going to come forward in force. Umbar are going to be able to overwhelm this skeleton crew of a front line that Khazad-Dum have set up, and at this point, honestly, like, sending forward more men is just going to be a bit of a waste, to be honest with you. That, however, is a very good target to go after. I mean, this was always the danger, considering the Iron Watch of Miramir are there. Massive blob forming for both Numenor and Umbar, and the Iron Watch going to be able to take some pot shots there. I mean, I would say that there is probably a shelf life on this because Numenor do have the ability to spread their wings a little bit up here. They're not bottled up in the choke point, which would have obviously been a catastrophe if the Iron Watch were shooting at them in there. But I do think Umbar and Numenor are going to be able to spread out a little bit more and do the business here. Corsair fencers combined with the Alcarondas Legion, just a single unit of warriors of Khazad-Dum holding down the fort once again. That, I believe, is archers. Indeed, Orc Hunters are firing away. I mean, the dwarves of Khazad-Dum, they are eager actually to continue holding on to this area. Erebor as well. I think this is a mistake, not only for the dwarves, but I think actually the Numenorians will probably look on this and think we're being dealt a pretty harsh hand here. We have managed to sort of take our goal, we've managed to get through here as quickly as we'd like, going after the Numenorian steel bows. AP arrows, of course, deadly to the dwarves. But this is playing into the hands of the elves here. As you can see, they are sort of just slowly marching towards their ultimate goal, which will be to push up this side, I would imagine. Because I think, based on how the fight up there is going, I think you'd rather go up against the dwarves than the Numenorians. Especially considering the dwarves are going to have to send forward more and more of their resources, because now they've committed, they kind of have to continue to commit. Unfortunately, however, these lines are too thin for me. The 3rd Legion Infantry and the Dwarven Miners. I mean, Miners are obviously not going to stand too much of a chance against Numenorean Sentinels. Once again, the Iron Watch trying to fire in, but at this point, like I said, the blob isn't really there. The value proposition, I mean, that initial volley, you can see there's a lot of dead Numenoreans there from the first volley, but as time has progressed, the Numenoreans have spread out more, and they're going to be able to mitigate quite a lot of this damage. They're still going to take damage, of course, but it's not going to be quite as devastating as it would otherwise be. And they're going to be able to inflict that back on the dwarves as well, with stuff like the steel bows getting into a good position as well. I like the way the Numenoreans have played this, to be honest with you. I'm less crazy about how the dwarves have approached this battle. There are pikes on the front line now, though. Pikes of higher quality than the Belagaia, but again, the Numenorean Sentinels are very, very strong. But you can see, actually, they've taken a bit of a beating from the Iron Watch, which won't go in their favour, of course. Lothlorien Mounted Company just sort of probing around. Lothlorien Spearmen and Axemen also, but I mean, you can see there it's actually the Ironfoot Wargoat Chariots with their crossbows on the back, which are going to be able to make it so the elves can't be that comfortable on the advance. They're going to have to put their backs into it a little bit more than doing the campaign style of trying to kite around with single units. That's not going to work here against real thinking players. Even if they are on the newer end of the spectrum, I don't think it's going to work out that way. Harbingers of Castamere moving in. You can see the Seafarers there taking Iron Watch of Mirrormere fire, but yeah, Harbinger's on the front line now. Corsair Blackguards, who I think have used their ammunition, but yeah, here we can see again the Iron Watch raining down some punishment, but like I said, it's... I mean, I will give the Dwarves credit, they have stabilised things on the front line to the point where actually their quality on the front is enough to the point where the Numenorians are going to have to commit more units in to actually take advantage of the ground they've taken. Khazad-Dum Reclaimers as well, they're like... This is the issue, like they're just throwing themselves at one another, and it is actually a rather intriguing fight, but ultimately I would be very surprised from this position already if the Elves didn't go on to win this battle. That's the nature of a free-for-all after all. If you unthinkingly charge into a fight with one team and you leave the other completely unopposed, then that's just how it's going to be. And to be honest with you, the best thing they could probably do for one another at this point, Numenor and the Dwarves, is to back off from one another, agree to a ceasefire, and double team the Elves, because if you don't, you're going to find yourselves very much at the mercy of all of that quality that Imladris and Lothlorien are going to be bringing to the table later on. Numenor are holding back some of their own quality, but that's not going to be enough to deal with a whole army. Pharazim Swordmasters are strong, but they're not that strong, especially when you consider there's stuff like Gwaithir Myrdain, Watchers of the Golden Wood, Kindred of Caliborn, all of that good stuff that they're going to have to deal with. All kinds of Khazad-Dum out of ammunition being sent in. To be fair to Numenor though, they sort of had the upper hand initially, and I think they have tried to be cautious with the Elves in mind. But the Dwarves have sent forward a lot. And I think as a result, I mean the Dwarves may even go on to win this fight because Numenor have to try and hold back for later. But I mean, just look at this, like there's a full army on the way. Deadly Boy and Manus Hudson will be very pleased with how the fight up on the higher ground has gone, to be honest with you. You can see actually down here, there's a decent amount of Erebor troops over here. I mean, they haven't sent forward everything at one another, the Dwarves and Numenor. You can see here, Lorenan Spearmen, higher quality than the Ironfoot Spears. These Ironfoots are going to need a little bit of help. I mean, to be fair, a unit of Ironfoot Pikes would provide that help very nicely with the Phalanx. The Woodland Protectors are down here. It'll be interesting to see what they go after. But yeah, the Elves are doing this right. I mean, you can only oppose what is put in front of you, and the Elves can only take advantage of the situation as it is. Javelins getting into position. They don't need to be too quick here, the Elves. They know that already they've built up a lead by not really having to do much at all. So it will be interesting to see. I mean, Iron Watch have probably used up their ammunition at this point, which would of course be a real tool to be reckoned with. Ironfoot Axe Throwers throwing their payloads in, and yeah, the Dwarves have gained the upper hand here. This is the thing, like Numenor gained a bit of an advantage early on, but a combination now of the Iron Watch doing their thing earlier on, and now the Ironfoot Axe Throwers continuing to fire away, the Numenoreans are starting to struggle. And it does go to show, if you come forward in a big way, as the Dwarves, you really do need to commit a lot to stop them. So despite a rough start, they're continuing to charge forward now. They're going after the Trebuchet, rightly so, because the Trebuchet is a real concern for them. And they're not even going to be able to get a single volley off, I don't think, here. 2nd Legion Axe Guard and Warriors of Khazad-Dum moving forward. There's still a long way to go in this fight, though, so while it has been a particularly violent start to this battle for both the Dwarves and the Numenoreans, that tells me that the Elves aren't going to be able to just swamp forward and kill off whoever is left. I would still back the Elves from this position onward, and I'd be very surprised if they didn't go on to win. But we shall see. Ironfoot Spears moving in. That was a very interesting way to use a spear. 2nd Legion Axe Guard also. These Numenorean steel bows. And yeah, I think what the Numenoreans have tried to do here is they've tried to be as efficient as possible, and it's backfired because the Dwarves have come at them in numbers, with strength. They've also used up pretty much all of their range power, however, the Dwarves, which is really going to hurt them against the Elves later on. Yes, the Dwarves are pretty good at absorbing arrow fire with all their armour, but if the Elves completely unopposed, that damage is still going to be really telling. These pikes holding down the front line, Seafarers on the front line as well. Erebor Legionaries, who we actually missed in the composition, but they are the higher tier line of unit for Erebor, of course. Doing a good job. Orc Hunters moving forwards. Pharazim Swordmasters. There goes our Pharazon. Cut down by one of the Axe Guard of Erebor, who should probably lose this fight, to be honest with you. Actually, no, victory seems certain, which is surprising. The Iron Watcher in melee, lugging around those big ballistas. I assume the Khazad-Dum have actually, yeah, they're broken and fighting to the death. The player has admitted defeat, so Numenor throwing in the towel. It's a bit of a shame when a player does that, but to be fair, I mean, the Dwarves have overrun them here, which is interesting because early on you have to say that Numenor, in that initial fight, there was like 4 infantry units that Khazad-Dum effectively threw away, and Numenor doing well, but then the Iron Watch, the Axe Throwers, the Archer support, all of it started to come into effect, and the Numenoreans weren't really able to get their support into position because they got through the choke point, but they didn't manage to get to a position where they could get their support into a comfortable place to be used, which is certainly interesting and a consideration to be made for players. Yeah, and yeah, the elves, with the Numenoreans starting to fall apart at the seams, all that remains is for them to try and wipe away the dwarves. Swords of Rivendell losing on the front line, however, that phalanx is, it's something that you do need to be a little bit concerned about. And I will say, actually, the crossbows are the tools that the dwarves haven't used yet, to be fair. And if they're used wisely, they can certainly take away some key units for the elves. What are they being used on, though? If they're being used on archers, that's not really the units you want to be using them on, and yeah, they are. I mean, yeah, the Lothlorien archers are a problem. They're shooting at you, and they're pretty decent in melee, but the crossbows are the sort of thing you need going after Eldarenway, or any of the Gwythe units. Throwing in river wards heading to the front line. They should be pretty useful on the front line, but the problem on the front line isn't so much quality, it's just the fact that the dwarves have got a phalanx unit in there, which is making passage for the elves somewhat difficult. We'll see. Meanwhile, further up here, the final bastions of the Numenoreans still fighting away. Bloodbath McGrath hasn't thrown in the towel like his ally did, but of course it's only a matter of time. The most he can do is inflict more pain on the dwarves to make their battle against the elves just that much harder, and it's already going to be a real uphill struggle for the dwarves from here. The Orc Hunters are there, the Sons of the Fallen are in there, with obviously a very strong spear unit. They're not AP like they used to be, but they're incredibly strong. Very tough to wear down, as any spear that you pay that much for should be. Similar sort of category actually to the Eldarenway Spearmen now that I think about it. Not multiple HP, but stats really, really high. Fantastic for holding the line. Corsair Blackguards in here, fighting to the bitter end. 2 sentries, there's 1 pikeman and a banner carrier. Peculiar to say the least. Here come the Gwythe Rockdoor. This is going to be interesting actually, because obviously the knights are here. They could get some really good picks actually. Ironfoot Axe Throwers, they're out of ammunition to be fair. I mean, they should get their lances out, they do. And they're going to be able to just bisect that very depleted unit. Erebor Legionaries would be a good target to go after as well. Those pockets of resistance over there, although they do need to be careful if there are any pikes still in those infantry blocks. I mean, Sons of the Fallen as well, there goes Castamere. Outlasted Ar-Pharazôn, who I'd assume would be somewhat of an idol to Castamere. But yes, Sons of the Fallen, definitely something that the Gwythe Rock will need to look out for, because they're going to be the sort of thing which can inflict terrible losses on them. And these Sons of the Fallen need to get after that cavalry now. Warriors of Khazad-Dum aren't really the best thing to put in the way of them. They'll get absolutely flattened. That wasn't really a charge, they just sort of bungled into them. And yeah, I mean in melee actually as well, heavy axemen are not the worst shout against cavalry. High damage and armour piercing bite is going to be useful against knights, but obviously if they charge into heavy axemen they're still going to do tons and tons of damage. It's if they get caught in and amongst them in melee that the problem starts to arise. Ironfoot spears moving up, so I mean they're doing the right thing here, the dwarves. They're getting some anti-cavalry units to try and zone them out. Let's have a little look at what's going on. I mean, you can see the elves have got a lot of reserves, high quality reserves as well, Imladris Guardians. Lothlorien are the ones that are sort of taking on quite a lot of the burden. I mean, Imladris sentries moving forward, so yeah. Phalanx unit now, the Elven Phalanx should definitely have the edge. You can see these 2 little inlays that both the dwarves and the elves are using for their reserves so that they can't be shot. I like that. Uses them out nicely. And yeah, I mean, especially for the dwarves at this point, I mean, any ranged units they still have with ammunition are going to have to be used almost to perfection, I would say. I mean, to be fair, the Watchers of the Golden would have been pushed forward, and they are definitely worth going after with crossbows, and I think that is what the dwarves are doing. I mean, you can see here that Manus Hudson is trying to use these silver thorns. But yeah, I mean, it would also be worth this Erebor cavalry, I think, going after the Gwythe Rock Dogs. They won't beat them in a straight-up fight, but it would at least get them stuck in melee with something. because at the moment, I mean, this is obviously going to be a bit of an annoyance here. You can see 4th Legion Shield Guard blocking the way for the Gwaithiroctor as they try to get through. I mean, that was a little bit clumsy, but the Gwaithiroctor will be able to at least pull most of their unit through that. But a few of the knights do fall. But yeah, it's going to be difficult for the dwarves. They do have the advantage of terrain. They do have the superior position, it's worth saying, but all of those units that they lost fighting the Numenoreans are units that the elves didn't lose fighting the Numenoreans. So it would be a Herculean effort for them to pull out the victory here. Erebor units on the front line doing their best to hold off this two-pronged assault from Imladris and Lothlorien. It'll work for the time being because of the phalanx, but with elven pikes there, higher tier elven pikes, the dwarves are not going to hold an advantage much longer, I don't think. Gwaithir are ready to go in there as well. I mean, and the problem is, as soon as this front line falls, the elves can just flood forwards, and the dwarves probably won't be able to recover a front line from there. Some 2nd Legion moving in, but a very minor pocket of resistance, you would have to say. Not exactly the sort of thing which is going to save the front line. Some Ironfoot pikes coming down. I mean, 64 of them. It will at least make the front line hold for longer, but you can see the numbers difference and the quality difference as well. I mean, these are Ironfoots primarily that are on the front line, which are decent, but they're not up to the same level as Lorenand units or the Imladris sentries. Broinen River Wars getting hit by a few axe throwers. Not the worst target to go after, actually. But yeah, I mean, a lot of these Elven units are exhausted, having to march a long way, having to march uphill. Karen Amroth Rangers starting to fire away. I'm not sure what they're firing at, actually. They can't have the best angle, and indeed they don't. I think they're trying to go after these units that are in this little inlay over here. Some of those arrows are hitting. I mean, Elven accuracy is going to make up a lot for that, but they're also coming from on high, so they're not actually getting the most out of the body piercing, because most of those arrows are only hitting the one unit, and Rangers don't have a high base damage. We have here 2nd Legion. Still fighting away. Those Ironfoot pikes are still on the front line. I think at this point what the dwarves are probably thinking is we've probably used up too much of our ranged units. Or the ammunition on our ranged units. I think we used up too much of it on the Numenoreans. Yes, we ended up burying them. But now we really, the only thing we have left to us is to try and bottle the elves up. And hope that's enough. And hope is not going to be enough for that, I'm afraid. These crossbows still have a bit of ammo, and to be fair, they have done a decent job. The axe throwers still have a little bit as well, by the looks of things. Khazad-Dum reclaimers throwing their axes in. Probably wouldn't be going after the woodland protectors, to be honest with you, but I mean, it might be enough to panic the elves into committing forward more. Some AP heading to the front line in the Lorenand warriors. Defeat seems certain for the Ironfoot pikes. Karen Amroth Range is pretty good in melee as well with that two-hander of theirs. Yeah, just look at the reserves, look at the luxury of the reserves they have. Imladris Guardians with upgrades, Eldarenway swords and spears, Watchers of the Goldenwood, who did actually take a bit of a beating from the crossbows, but in melee still superb. Blades of the Wood, maybe not so much, but Kindred of Caliborn, it's gonna be too much. Ironfoot Wargoats are actually over here. I mean, this could be their best chance, the dwarves. Getting in and amongst the back lines with these units. Whatever happened to the Gwaithiroctor? Were they hunted down? They were up here. They could have been hunted down. They could have crashed into the Sons of the Fallen, and that may well have been that. I mean, yeah, look at this. Yeah, so the Gwaithiroctor were killed off. It's unfortunate. I mean, considering how little micro the elves are actually having to do, that's kind of sloppy, to be honest with you. The dwarves are still kind of holding on here, but obviously the sheer weight of numbers is going to be a problem after a certain length of time. 2nd Legion Axe Guard moving in. I think the dwarves don't really have the luxury of time here. I think they're going to have to try and commit that cavalry of theirs sooner rather than later. Otherwise they're going to be running into a real uphill struggle, unfortunately for them. Ironfoot crossbowmen still have ammunition, to be fair. Still trying to do their thing. The sentries would definitely be a worthwhile target to go after, as with the Myrdain. They're pulling back actually in Imladris here. Making a bit of a meal of this, the elves. I mean, they had everything set up for them. There was no real need to... This is going to be a pretty sloppy, I think. I mean, there you can see every bolt that hits is pretty much a guaranteed kill when you consider the damage that the crossbowmen on the back of the chariots can do. But they can't afford to lose them, because they're the sort of thing which is going to be absolutely vital when it comes to trying to do some damage to the Elven backlines. The War Goats, they need to continue to stop the Lorien Mounted Company. They can't afford to pull out, because the chariots are the real prize here, and Lorien know it, I think. They tried to pull away there, but Medieval 2's cavalry rubber banding sent them back into the War Goats. I mean, those War Goats are going to die here. They're surrounded, and they're getting shot from the split shots up on the higher ground. And the volume of fire from the chariots, while individually those bolts are very strong, there just isn't enough of them to do really substantial damage. Bit of friendly fire from those split shots as well, to be fair. Woodland Protectors are in. Javelins also doing their thing. Watchers of the Goldenwood coming down here. Manus going about his business. Doesn't have any spears that he could send down here though, which would be ideal. I think, to be honest with you, Lothlorien don't really need to chase out here. They just need to keep their backline secure, because yeah, the dwarves can take pot shots at you, but you've got archers that can deal with them. In come the Galatharan Blade Masters. More elves just being added to the front. I mean, to be fair, the dwarves do have a pretty decent front line here, but you can just see from how thick the assaults are. And it's not even as if this is like a standard scenario type situation where the high quality, low numbers against the high numbers, low quality. All of those elven attackers pretty much are of high quality, or at least mid quality, with stuff like the Blades of the Wood. So, like the dwarves, they're not going to be able to hold on through sheer strength at arms here, which is why I think there's a certain inevitability about this. But they've done pretty well. I think their terrain has certainly helped them. The elves have sort of attacked uphill into a reasonably defensible position for the dwarves. Watchers of the Goldenwood are here. I mean, to be fair, there's only 2 mounted company left, so at the very least the War Goat chariots have managed to do that, but they need to do something with these War Goats at this point. They need to move them in. They need to start charging into the back lines, because it's really the final gambit that the dwarves have, I think. They could do some real damage. I mean, yes, there are pikes in there, which are obviously going to be a massive problem for the chariots as soon as they make contact, but the initial shock damage they could do and the disarray they could cause, I think, is their only chance. And even then, it may be only a fool's hope. Mighty Myrdain yet to be committed. More Galatharan Blade Masters. You can see the dwarves doing their best to hold on. There's still some Sons of the Fallen in there. Whatever happened to the Dragon Slayers? They would be an interesting unit. They may have been committed earlier and I just didn't notice them. If they lost their lives against the Numenoreans, that's yet another example of a unit that maybe should have been held back a bit. We shall see. Ironfoot Wargoat chariots, I think at this point, are being chased. I mean, one of them certainly fell. Swords of Rivendell routing. They managed to actually avoid the Watchers of the Goldenwood there. I mean, this is it. This is the chance. I think Morris, he needs to just gather his courage. Even if he doesn't make it there, this is the only thing he can do with them. Like, just leaving them there to be chased by Watchers of the Goldenwood isn't what you want. Your Woodland Protectors are going to throw a volley of javelins in, really good against elephant class units, which the chariots are. They're going to get another volley off? Yeah, they were. That's really unfortunate. Point blank volley, and the Woodland Protectors silence what was the last faint hope of the dwarves, really. Wythy Myrdain moving in. Crossbows still firing, but at this point they don't have the angle that they used to on certain units. I think they're trying to go after the Kindred, aren't they? Yes, they are. Not the worst target, again. Worth going after them. Strong at range and in melee, so you may as well try and shoot them, to be honest with you. You've got a better angle on them than you do on the infantry in front, but the problem is the infantry eventually is going to wear down your front line. The quality is there. You don't have the numbers anymore. And you have to say, the dwarves and the Numenoreans played this free-for-all in a way which played right into the elves' hands. It's one of those situations, especially I think from a Numenorean perspective. I think it would have been well worth their time to not bother trying to take this high ground. I think it's overrated, to be honest with you. The dwarves, I think, probably should have fell back over here. There's a pathway up there as well which they could have used, because then it would have introduced a dilemma. The Numenoreans would have been here, the elves would have been marching up this way, they would have been over there. Then it would have been a true Mexican standoff. As it was, they charged very unthinkingly into one another, and it has ended up costing both of them. It cost the Numenoreans very dearly, because they moved in, initially did quite well with their aggressive push to try and take this area, but they weren't then willing to double down on that, whereas the dwarves were, and as a result the dwarves ended up winning. But that was also a double-edged sword, of course, because while the dwarves ultimately ended up gaining some satisfaction against the Numenoreans, they will ultimately be defeated by the elves. They're putting up a good fight, though, the dwarves. And like I said, part of that comes down to the terrain that they occupy, because they have actually pushed back from the original front line, and it is actually going to end up being closer than I probably would have thought it would have been. Evenly matched. Is there? Yeah, there are still a few reserves. Some Galatharan Blade Masters in here, a couple of units, and some Kindred. Whereas the Dwarven... Oh, there are the Dragon Slayers, so they were being held back. I mean, the Dwarves have had some reserves at least. So they're doing their thing. You're unlikely to get many kills on the Dragon Slayers from the front, even with the Kindred of Celeborn, to be honest. Multiple HP, massive armour and shield values, as you would expect from these Dwarven units. Those split shots really falling like rain, getting some friendly fire actually as well. So this is it really. The final fling. 6 axe throwers. Every little helps at this point. I mean, I still believe the elves are going to have too much. Javelins being thrown into the front line as well. If the elves don't have enough to take this Dwarven position, then it shows that they had a lack of finesse in this particular situation, because they had every advantage going their way. And to go on to lose this fight would be criminal, to be honest with you. And it would also show that it's kind of difficult to keep track of, but it would show, I think, that the crossbows did target some good things. There's not a carpet of bodies over here, but a lot of what is dead over here are good stuff, like Imladris Guardians, Sentries, Watchers of the Golden Wood. The right targets to go after. Maybe not as many as they would have liked in terms of kills, but such is the way of things. Here on the front line, I mean, there's still some good quality units. Sons of the Fallen, that's an officer, but there are Sons of the Fallen in here. Erebor Legionaries are a good quality infantry unit as well. Dragon Slayers. Problem is, there's still Kindred, there's still Watchers, Elven Pikemen, which are of higher quality than anything the Dwarves bought in terms of offering a phalanx. And that, I think, is going to be the difference here. Woodland Protectors still have their ammunition as well, so they're going to be able to throw a few javelins in here and there. Which, again, everything points towards an elf victory. But I have to give credit to the Dwarves, actually. They've held on better than I thought they would. It looked dodgy early on. The way that they engaged the Numenoreans first and foremost with some very exposed units didn't look great. But ultimately they ended up recovering. And in particular those Iron Watch were able to reap a bloody toll on the Numenoreans, and yeah, didn't work out for them. Ultimately in the long run it hasn't worked out for the Dwarves either, you would say, despite playing reasonably well. All about decision making, long-term planning. And the elves didn't even really need to make any decisions or do any long-term planning. The battle just sort of fell into their hands, and you know, they've taken it gladly. And who can blame them for that? Fighting hard though, the dwarves. There's a few things still back down here. What is going on over here? There's like this one elven unit that's running for the hills. Look at this man. Sword of Rivendell. He's just sort of hanging out. He's not routing, he's just running this way. Just taking in the sights, perhaps? This map, of course, has been a very reliable one over the course of Third Age, way back since Vanilla. Always produces some good stuff. Kindred of Celeborn firing up into the air. I mean, they're doing their best to be effective with their arrows, but I mean, they're at least shooting towards the back of the formation now, so friendly fire is less likely. So the odd hit they do get isn't going to be tinged with the bitter aftertaste of some friendly fire. There goes Balin, so Khazad-Dum's general falls. There goes Lothlorien's general as well. So Haldir and Balin fall almost simultaneously. It's the Erebor general that would be more useful to kill though, actually, because Khazad-Dum's morale is such that you're not really going to be able to rout them. Whereas Erebor, they are a little bit more susceptible to that. It must be said. Oh, he just got run through with a javelin. Well shot from one of those woodland protectors, you have to say. A classic grind fest towards the finish line now, though. What have we got here? Imladris Sentries, victory, almost a certainty. And this is also another problem. Like, at this point, there's not really very many Dwarven pikes left. And even if there were, they're not as high quality as the Imladris Sentries. Although they're doing that pike glitch where they shuffle backwards into the enemy lines. Not going to make too much of a difference at this stage though. There is the Erebor General. His distinctive red cape does make him stand out somewhat. You can see actually over on this side where the Dragon Slayers of Erebor Mithrin are, the dwarves are actually pushing the elves back, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that it's lighter units over here. Loren Archers, Galatharan Blade Masters, not really up to the same level of quality, but it's not going to matter too much, I don't think. Kindred of Celeborn heading to the front line. They should probably be over here actually stopping that advance. They'll put up more of a fight at least, especially with their dual wielding, which leads to significantly higher melee defense, of course. Still the Spears of the Sons to fall. I mean, this is the thing, like, even though for a while now the elves have had this fight reasonably sewn up, the dwarves have just got such staying power that it's difficult to get rid of them. Woodland Protectors as well. I mean, they have ammo? No, they still have some javelins left. It's only really the front ranks that are able to fire though, with the angle being what it is. Galatharan Blade Masters trying to more tightly pack up so they're not so easily pushed aside by the Dragon Slayers. They've done a really good job, although now they're going to start to come into contact with the Gwaithir Myrdain, which is definitely a real battle of the Titans. Kindred of Celeborn in here also. They're at the back though, so it'll take them a while to fight their way to the front. Blades of the Wood, not very many of them left. I mean, the dwarves will be able to grind the elves down here to a decent extent actually, and it has turned out to be far closer than I perhaps would have thought possible. There goes the Imladris General as well, so the only general left on the field is actually the Erebor one. It would be at this moment where you would want the chariots coming into the backfield, because they could actually turn this fight around, I think. With the generals gone, some of the lower end Elven units would probably rout as a result of chariots being flung into the back. And that would have been an interesting thing, wouldn't it? Then I would have had to give the Dwarven players enormous credit for being able to turn this fight around. I think the Elven players, to be fair, they haven't really needed to engage their brains all that much, to be honest with you, because the battle has gone their way. But I mean, some of the decisions have been a little bit dodgy, I have to say. On another day, they could very well have ended up throwing this one away. But as it was, the massive advantage they had was enough to make sure that it didn't evaporate completely. Here, Elder Enway Sword Masters still on the front line. Obviously really good to have in the late game as well. They're actually shaken, interestingly enough. It might be the Dragon Slayers. Like, they might cause fear. Fear causing units, obviously a bit of a concern. I don't think it's the Sons of the Fallen. I think the Sons of the Fallen, they might be a morale boosting unit. That's a bit of a concern. Look at that. There are some routing units. Like I said, a chariot in the back. Even with the chariot in the back though, stuff like the Kindred aren't going to rout. Stuff like the Gwaithir Myrdain aren't going to rout. But I mean, look at this. Look at this. The holding power here, actually, of the Sons of the Fallen and the Dragon Slayers have carried the dwarves a long way. I'm still not sure it's going to be enough, to be honest with you, because there aren't many Dragon Slayers. Well, I mean, I say that, 19 Dragon Slayers. Still some Erebor Legionaries. Have the elves rested on their laurels too much? If more of their sort of basic entry-level stuff starts to, well, let's say entry, non-elite stuff, shall we say, by Elven standards, starts to rout off, they could be in real trouble here, because there are still pikes available, but you can see Erebor's morale is starting to look a little bit sketchy as well. And I do still think ultimately with the Kindred being committed, still with some Elven pikes, they should still be fine, the elves. Should being the operative word. I mean, the Dragon Slayers have really beasted things out, but they're taking losses. Last time we looked they had 19, now there's only 14 of them. Woodland Protectors. Victory seems certain, although they are shaken. Losing 17 men from the front line could be the difference between victory and defeat here. There's still those Elder Enway. Are they still shaken, I wonder? Nope, they're steady now, which is definitely what you want. They're trying to get to the front line to get some of their better... Well, there goes the Erebor General. That could be what finally breaks the back of this, because I think, yeah, they're wavering now. With that, I think the Erebor morale starts to collapse now. 21 pikes, like they needed them on the front line. That was always going to be the problem. Erebor's morale between the Dwarven and Elven factions, and actually I would say the Numenoreans as well. Probably the single lowest morale of any faction on the field today. But that almost was embarrassing for the elves. So close, and like I said, if they had just maybe if they conserved a little bit more of their ammunition from the top, because they didn't need to use that much on the Numenorians, I don't think. That could have been the difference. A few more throwing axes at their disposal in the late game here, and they could have conceivably pulled that back to a good victory. And that would have been very impressive. I have to say, I give the Dwarven players quite a lot of credit. Like, it was a little bit sketchy early on. The decision making to go all in on the Numenorians may be questionable. But I have to say, all things considered, they did really rather well. And the elves can count themselves rather fortunate. Sons of the Fallen aren't going to rout. They are going to stand and fight forevermore. And there he goes. Kicked and cut. Dragon Slayer's much the same. Stand and fight to the bitter end. Not much of them left now, but an impressive display, but the elves ultimately victorious. This would have been within 10% though, very comfortably. I mean, look at this, this is a tiny elven force that's left. Remarkable, really, when you consider things. I mean, can't be more than 100 elves left. There's 23, yeah, I mean, it's about maybe just over 100. That's probably as many elves as there are on the field today, which is very close. Very close indeed. Obviously, you can't take into account men remaining because casualties get healed, especially from Numenor, who admitted defeat, so more of their casualties will get healed because they didn't stand and fight. Obviously the Numenoreans, not a great... It was actually looking fairly promising right off the bat. It looked like they were going to be able to claim the high ground, but then the dwarves doubled down, and they didn't, and that was ultimately the difference. And obviously the problem was they were still reasonably bottled up enough, I think, for the Iron Watch of Mirrormere to do their thing, and so ultimately it didn't end up working out for the Numenoreans, and maybe they should have been the ones to hold back. Like, trying to take the high ground from the dwarves was always going to get a fairly strong response, I think. I think a little bit more restraint from the Numenoreans could have led to this battle being quite a bit different. As for the dwarves, like I said, decision making could be debated, but I think the way they went about their plan was actually very good. They ended up performing very well. A lot of that can be put down, to be fair, to this holding power of the dwarves in general. But still, you need to execute, and that's exactly what they did. So I think they can be quite proud of this. I think this is definitely one of those heroic defeats. As for the elves, victory is technically theirs. But you have to say they were quite fortunate. Like, the dwarves ran them very close, and they had no reason to be able to do that. Yes, the Numenoreans didn't do huge damage to the dwarves, generally speaking, but the elves were perfectly healthy when they got to the dwarven front line. Yes, the terrain favoured the dwarves, but that was never going to be a viable excuse, I think, if the elves went on to actually lose this battle. But in the end, they did actually win it. So Imladris, Gwaithir Myrdain, that is, of course, the Warhammer-wielding shock infantry units. Unsurprisingly, actually, in a fight like this, doing very well, because they were up against, obviously, entirely dwarven infantry, and they were on the front line for a good long time, and with that huge AP damage they're able to chuck out, perfect fight for them, really. 244 kills on dwarven units as well, considering their quality, is a very impressive stat. Nothing else actually broke the 100 barrier for them, which is interesting. Obviously they had less to kill. The dwarves got by far more kills because they had to fight off 2 opponents, basically. What came closest? 91 on some Eldarenway Swordmasters. Again, decent, but the lack of AP, it does go to show that the lack of AP against the dwarves can be a problem. Huge base damage on the Elven Swordsmen, but the AP does make a big difference, especially when the armour values are as high as some of the upper end Dwarven units they were facing, like Sons of the Fallen and Dragon Slayers of Ered Mithrin. 77 on sentries. The sentries were obviously going to be a good pick to have just to shore things up at the line, but yeah, I think overall the Myrdain head and shoulders above everything else, as perhaps you would expect against a Dwarven opposition. So yeah, big thank you to Deadly Boy for sending this one in. It's definitely salvaged things after the huge disappointment of the scenario not working. And like I said, it is a difficult one, I think, because these maps are obviously very impressive looking, but for me it's just not worth it, especially considering that most scenarios, like I said, like maps generally speaking, will use sections of it more so than the greater whole, so there's no real need for these cityscape maps to span the whole area, because all it does is invite crashing, and the whole map does not get used. To be fair, in that last scenario, a good portion of the map was looking to be used, to be fair, but there was still a whole section of the city which never would have seen any combat, and contributes to the fact that that is the problem. I mean, it only ever shows up on these decadent cityscape maps, I'll call them, These maps where the map creators have put on a lot of assets. They may be fine to play on, but again, this comes back to the thing that it's only a problem for me, really, and possibly other content creators as well, in the sense that they're a real pig to try and record on. It just does not function properly. And it's one of the reasons why certain maps I think I have to effectively blacklist, and Mistrand I think is one of them. There are a few others as well, which come and go. The old Pelagria, for example, but you never really see that one anymore anyway. That was definitely an issue. That was the map which caused me to rant a while back, probably about a year or so ago now. But yeah, obviously that is the situation with regards to that, and I do actually hope that, map creators, like, big maps are fine. Like Minas Tirith, there's no issues on Minas Tirith, and that's enormous. The maps that WK creates, the Grey Havens, not an issue. But some cityscape maps, you can tell they're sort of rougher around the edges. There's a lot of just buildings here and there. There's a lot of fences to prevent you from being able to move through them. There's a lot of different assets which aren't really necessary when you boil it down, because not all of the map is being used. At least that's what I hope. I mean, I don't blame people if they don't pay any attention to this, because it's something that only will affect me, and only potentially a couple of other people as well. So it is what it is, really. I mean, the other scenario that Eclipse sent me, where it was a lot of lagging on the Dwarven architecture settlement, Donaz Karak, I think it was called, that was a completely separate issue. That wasn't an issue of crashing because there was too much on the map. That was an issue of certain architecture causing the frames to plummet. That's a completely separate issue. But you'll notice that was a scenario where the actual settlement itself wasn't spanning the entirety of the map. And that's why it didn't crash. That's why its problem was different. But I do have a lot of sympathy, to be fair, to people who make stuff on Medieval 2. The game at this point is being pushed to the very limit. And yeah, it is what it is. But that's the explanation. I think that's something to sort of watch out for in the future. It was more sort of the thing that just bummed me out, to be honest with you, and sort of made my mood plummet. Less so than me getting actively annoyed like I did a year ago when that Pelagria battle happened. But yeah, this was a quality battle anyway. More high quality actually than I was expecting from a free-for-all like this, to be honest with you, especially with how it started. It ended up being really rather enjoyable, I would say. But yeah, I do still have Third Age replays I can do. I actually have been meaning to sort of make a return to Moria. Moria's a bit of a endurance challenge to cast, to be honest with you. But we shall see. There is also something else that I've been thinking about doing. And that is streaming a campaign in Divide and Conquer. It is something that I'm only thinking about at this point in time, because, to be honest with you, there is something else which has been kind of getting me down recently, and that is the fact that my setup for streaming is really awkward. There's a combination of factors which make it kind of awkward. I do feel as though, however, Divide and Conquer may not be as awkward as streaming stuff multiplayer online. The other thing that I do want to stream is try and stream one of Eclipse's games. That's really playing with fire, though, for reasons that I will go into another time, I think. But just bearing that in mind, that is something I've been considering recently. And I have also, if that's the sort of thing that people do really want, what I might do is organise things thusly. What I might do is have 3 battle replays a week on set days rather than just sort of every 2 days, so it's alternating throughout the week. I might have them on set days, so for example, just to pull things out of the air, Monday, Wednesday and Sunday, for example. And then stream a Divide and Conquer campaign once a week on one of the days where I'm not uploading. That's an idea that I've been playing around with, potentially. But let me know what you think. I mean, I don't really know how many people are actually going to watch the post screen of this and watch this far. But yeah, it's the sort of thing that can be considered. It's the sort of thing that I might put out a poll on, because obviously there are faction decisions to be made in Divide and Conquer. And it's been a long time since I played a campaign in Medieval 2, so I will be noob tier rubbish at it. So bear that in mind before you lumber me with a faction that's hard to play, like one of the isolated orc factions, for example, or one of the sort of more difficult to play Kingdoms of Men. But yeah, that's something worth considering. So yeah, that's the loose plan in the future. But next up will be another battle replay. It might be Moria if tomorrow, when I do another recording session, I can summon the will to go through Moria. It's definitely a hard one to cast. Or it might be another one in Reforged, we'll see. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and hope you will join me for whatever is next.